Hi, and as you can see, I've been finally getting on with some of the Nighthawk models. I hope very soon that these will be done, and also fairly rapidly that a number of the other units are done. These I'll talk about in a video very soon. I'm hoping in a couple of days, but in some ways it's a lot easier in the Scave, in some ways not so easy, but you know, there you go. So what I want to talk about in this one is really about probability. Now before I do that, I just want to introduce. So the avatars I commissioned are sort of all done now. There are other ones I will eventually get as well, but these are sort of the armies that I'll be focusing on in the interim, at least in the very short term. I'm not still quite sure about the Dark Elves ones, but I think they look cool. So maybe there. I really like the Plague Priest, actually. Now, if you're interested in getting into these, you've done yourself, I have put a link in the description below to the Twitter of the artist who did these for me. But on to probability, the importance of probability in Warhammer, and what sort of prompted this. In order for me to get back into Age of Sigmar, because I've been out of Warhammer for so many years, and when I'm designing the armies, I kept thinking to myself, oh yeah, do that, do that. And then I kept thinking, in some ways I'm designing it as I would have for an old Warhammer Fantasy Battle game. And I thought, you know, you look at the rules, there are fundamental differences, and that inevitably is going to affect strategy. Am I really getting it right? And obviously I've got time to play games and refine it, and of course, but I'd like to, you know, there's a number of aspects to playing Warhammer, any type of Warhammer. The part I least like is the painting. It takes me so long to do anything, it's always so rubbish. But also the thing I most like, apart from the playing, is designing armies and coming up with strategies and things like that. And so what I thought I'll do is I'll watch some battle reports. I'll see if there's some battle reports on YouTube. There's not a lot where you can really see what's going on, but I found some and I started watching them. And I want to talk about some of those again in another video. But there was one particular bit. I was watching this one particular battle report, and one of the players in it was... I didn't really think he was a terribly good sport. He was one of those who constantly bemoans bad luck when it's not actually bad luck. And I've seen a couple of people like this before, and I sort of thought at the time, and I thought of this guy as well. I think the problem here is that he doesn't fully understand probability. He doesn't really get it. Now, I'm going to come on to that in a bit, but I want to just draw back a story. There's a few stories I want to go through here from my Warhammer Fantasy Battle days. And a similar guy I came across in a grand tournament one time. This is when I had my Chaos Warrior army. It was a very highly mobile elite army. And he had a dwarf army. Now, in this army, I had a Chaos Lord on Dragon. And the aim of this army, it was highly mobile. The aim of the army, ultimately, particularly against a heavy infantry army, such as the dwarf army that was to get around, to outflank them effectively and crush them. So the idea would be that I'd send my Chaos Lord down one flank, my chosen Chaos Knights down the other, and they'd, generally speaking, players, and this guy was no different, would put their poorer units on the flanks and their big strong unit with their lord in it in the center. So I would roll down the flanks and then mug the powerful unit, which could do nothing against me because it was an infantry unit. Obviously, my two big weaknesses here, and what I have to really watch out for, is magic. Well, there's not really a lot of that in the dwarf army, and shooting, for which there potentially could be, you know, a serious amount of artillery flying my way. But this guy didn't really have a lot of that. And so what I effectively do is, but there's still going to be some shooting. I need to get into combat with my Chaos Lord on Dragon ASAP, because shooting is a real worry. So I get one move. At this point, he can shoot at me. And then I get, fly, of course, so I could move like 20 inches at a time. And then that's when I'd make my charge. So I'd pick my spot where it doesn't matter what he did with his units, I'd be able to make a good charge that would absolutely maul him. So all he really was able to shoot at me was a bolt thrower, basically. He had so little artillery, and he didn't even choose to shoot all of it at the Chaos Lord on Dragon. So what happened here is, at this point, against a bolt thrower, all right, any artillery is worrying. It can certainly do me some damage. but it's 0 chance of killing the dragon, tiny chance of killing the Chaos Lord. So, thinking about the logistics of this, basically, he would have had about a 2/3 chance of hitting. So we go through all this. It would have been hitting on 3s because I'm trying to think exactly where it was because it's going back some time now. I'll try and just pick on the things I'm sure of. But I'm sure it would have been within short range for the bolt thrower. And it's a large target, so 3+. So 2/3 chance to hit. Okay, it's quite likely to hit. Not certain, but it's quite likely. Then what had to happen is, once it had hit, you had to determine who it had hit. Now, at this point, I'm just thinking, this is fine, because you roll a d6. On a 1 to 5, it hits the large mount. I haven't got a problem with that. No problem with that at all. The dragon had 6 wounds, could absorb it. Even if it, did 3 wounds against it, as soon as I get into combat, no one really is touching it. So that's okay. And a 1 in 6 chance, if it rolled a 6, then it would hit the Lord on top. And that's the only thing that could potentially be worried. Even that I wasn't actually worried about. But it did. It rolled a 6. It hit my Chaos Lord now. So at this point, you're thinking, okay, so that's 2/3 chance to hit, 1/6 chance to hit the Chaos Lord, which is, what you ideally want to do. So then you're talking about 2/3 times 1/6, 2/18, which is 1/9. So 1 in 9 chance. So it's quite lucky so far. But it hadn't finished then. Then it had to wound. Strength 6 against toughness 5. So that means you're wounding again on 2/3 chance. So 2/3 times a 9th is 2/27. So then it's a case of, all right, you've done that. Now, I'm trying to think now what armor I had, and I can't remember. So we'll just assume that I wouldn't have had an armor save against it. I'm sure I would have had at least a bit of an armor save against it, because at the very least it would have been wearing chaos armor and it would have had a shield, at least against shooting attacks. So that would have given it, again, strength 6, some armor save. I have an idea I had a decent armor save, actually, with magic armor, but I can't remember. So we'll assume none. So we'll assume 2 out of 27 at this point. So it wounded, got past the armor. Now, I know he had a 4+ ward save. So that basically means on a 4+, I save it's done nothing. 50-50. And it failed. The ward save failed. So that means it's now a 1 in 27 chance. But even at this point, the Chaos Lord has got 3 wounds. The Bolt Thrower does D3 wounds. So it's only a 1 in 3rd chance that it kills the Chaos Lord. Again, if it doesn't, even if it wounds the Chaos Lord, all right, that's not ideal. I prefer that didn't happen. But what I'm going to be getting to combat next is not going to even get to attack back. I'm just going against scrappy units that he's put on the flanks. I'm going to roll down them all. And what I'd done as well, because one of them had a hero in it, to stop them they might have done anyway, but they might want to turn and face the Chaos Lord. So there's a chance then that a hero would get into combat with it. My other units, because as I say, against an army like this, the base strategy was Chaos Lord on Dragon, Chosen Knights, crunch. But there were other units in the army as well. Their main job was just to cause trouble. So if he turned to face my Chaos Lord and Dragon, another unit, say Marauder Horseman or a normal unit of Chaos Knights, would smash into their flank. There is no way they're getting their rank bonus. Someone is going to be doing a lot of attacks against bog standard troops and just crushing them. So he had to kill my Chaos Lord. Otherwise, doing 1 or even 2 wounds again is no good. 1 in 3 chance. And that's exactly what he did. So that's a 1 in 81 chance. So that's extremely lucky. Okay. Now, nothing was really said about that. That was fine. It's one of those things. It can happen. If you're going to have this situation, if you're going to create a situation where you've got so many points in the army, you put a Chaos Lord on a dragon against an artillery army, it's the sort of thing that can happen. But where I'm going to with this is, towards the end of the fight, it still all worked, and I still completely surrounded his main unit of Ironbreakers with Dwarf Lord in it, and I won the combat. And he had to make the leadership test on a 7. He had to get 7 or less on 2d6. Now, you're fairly likely to do that. That you've got a decent odds of that. It's not overwhelmingly likely to succeed, but it's more likely to succeed than not. It's about 2/3, isn't it? And so, but he failed it, you know, and he had to flee. I was surrounded on all sides. I just crunched him, and I ended up scoring a massacre, even though because everything else went according to plan. My dragon thankfully passed its, because it had to take a leadership test to make sure it didn't go berserk. It didn't, and that was that. But the thing is, this guy was bemoaning bad luck because he'd failed this roll on a 7. And I said to him, hang on a minute, you know, I sort of said, well, the chance of you doing that, okay, you were more likely to succeed than not, but it's not overwhelmingly like. And I had to point out, your chance when you killed my Chaos Lord, and if you hadn't have killed my Chaos Lord, imagine how much more damage he would have been doing. You know, your chances were extremely long of this, but he didn't get it at all. And I think this is a problem. A lot of people are not because really he shouldn't have fired his bolt thrower at my Chaos Lord and Dragon at all. I mean, in the end, he got lucky. But the chances were nothing was going to happen of any consequence. He really should have fired it at something where it might have done some good. Now, it was difficult, I'll grant you. A bolt thrower against a cavalry unit such as mine is not likely to do that much damage to anything. But, you know, I would argue, if you had a whole battery of them, or with cannons and stuff like that, I would absolutely say, yeah, fire everything at the Chaos Lord and Dragon and try and wipe it out. But given that you can't wipe it out, I would have suggested you use it on something else. But anyway, going back to the battle report I was watching really recently on Age of Sigmar. So what happened was, you had this guy. First of all, you know, I took a bit of a, you know, I was scratching my head a little bit because he was talking about his pre-battle plans. And describing it as, oh, these things never work out. And I'm thinking, so what he's probably talking about is something that has a low, if it doesn't act, if he's not exaggerating, these things, you know, generally don't work out. It's probably something that has a low probability of success, in which case, why are you doing it? There are times in a battle, of course, where you have to chance your arm because it's always a risk-reward calculation. I'm not saying you only ever take actions where you've got a high chance of success because that's not always possible. And sometimes, you know, the reward is so great and, you know, you think to yourself, well, if I can pull it off, then this will be great. And there isn't, you know, it's always that risk-reward ratio going on. But during the battle, I got an absolute test of it because he tried to make a charge roll. So what happens in Age of Sigmar is you make your normal, but for a charge roll, you roll 2d6, basically. And whatever result you get, that's how far in inches you can charge. And if it's not enough to charge into the unit you want, and anything that is close enough to use it, you don't want to. You don't move at all. You don't just move that distance forward. If you fail a charge, you don't move anywhere. So he declared a charge that had to be, he needed 9 basically, because this is the other thing that gets me in Age of Sigmar. In Warhammer Fantasy Battle, you weren't allowed to measure things until you're about to make an action. So you had to be able to judge distances. In Age of Sigmar, you don't, which is fine. I'm okay with that. I'm not going to sort of hark back and say one system or the other is better. They're just each system. So he knew he needed 9. Now, 9 is, you're unlikely to succeed needing a 9. You know, because you sort of think about, in terms of probability, obviously 2d6, there's 36 combinations of rolling 2 dice you can get when you need to add them up. So for a 9, you could get a 5 and a 4, or a 4 and a 5, 6 and 3, or 3 and a 6. There's 4 ways to get a 9, 3 ways to get a 10, 2 ways to get an 11, 1 way to get a 12. So that's like 10 different ways out of the 36. So that's a 5 in 18 chance of success. 5 in 18 chance. That means you've got a 13 in 18 chance of failure, which I already worked it out, is 72%. So there's a 72% chance you will fail. And it's not just that they were super disappointed when they did fail. What happened is they rolled their 2d6 and they got double 1. And what he did is he was describing, oh, he's hugely unlucky. How unlucky am I? I got a double 1. And this again told it like a lack of understanding about the importance of probability. Because he's thinking to himself, double 1, 1 in 36 chance of that. But that's not true. It wasn't a 1 in 36 chance. Because if he'd have got a 3 or a 4, if he'd have got an 8, you know, that still wouldn't have been enough. You know, he rolled a double 1, therefore scoring 2. It meant he didn't get to move at all. If he'd have rolled an 8, a double 4, which would actually be moderately lucky, he still would be going nowhere. So it made no difference. So it wasn't a 1 in 36 chance what he rolled. It was a 13 and 8 chance. There was 72% chance of him getting the result he got. Because not the double one, because the double one was irrelevant. You either succeed and get enough for the charge, or you don't. And he didn't. It didn't matter what he rolled from there. And that's what it's all about, really. When you're planning actions, a bit like in chess, you not only have to take into account of what your opponent might do, you have to, because there's a lot of dice involved, and because there's a lot of dice involved, as often as not, they'll generally behave themselves. They'll do what they should do. Sometimes you'll get lucky, sometimes you'll get unlucky. But most of the times you do what you do. And planning in advance, you can use this as well. So what I've been doing, look at Age of Sigmar, I've been looking at a few things. So take a couple of characters that have a bit of a choice. So at first I was looking at like a Legions of Nagash army, and I was thinking, Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon is the sort of thing I would like. But you get a choice. You can either have a Vampiric Sword or you can have a Death Lance. Now, a Death Lance gets a bonus on the charge. Vampiric Sword just gets a general bonus. So what I would do is I said, okay, well, let's see on average how much damage I'm likely to do with each of these two weapons. So things to take into account: number of attacks, your hit chance, your wound chance. Now, this is actually much easier in Age of Sigmar compared to Warhammer Fantasy Battle, because you're not comparing it to any stats that your opponent's got. Because your chance to hit or wound in Fantasy Battle, you compared weapon skill or strength against weapon skill or toughness of your opponent. So, but here you just know what your hit and wound is. Obviously, there can be magical effects or something that reduce it, or some aura that a unit has. But just for bog standard stuff. Then you're going to have to take into account the save that your opponent might get. Now, at this point, you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, I don't know that. But I'll just assume they're going to go up against a relatively elite unit. And let's say they have a 4+ save. Then I need to consider, okay, let's say I do wound and it gets through the armor. What is the damage? And then I need to consider what I call the effect, which is, okay, how much damage am I going to do? So what I did for the Vampire Lord is I worked out Death Lance on a charge, Death Lance normal, so subsequent bits of combat, or if I'm charged, let's say, and then the Vampiric Sword. And what, I can quite clearly see is on the charge, I'm going to be doing an average, just statistical average of 2.7. Obviously, I can't do 2.7. It means 2, sometimes 3 others. But at 2.7, the Death Lance after that is about 1.8, but the Vampiric Sword, about 2.4. So I might look at that and think, okay, well, the Death Lance looks really good on the charge. But, especially after reading the rules and watching battle reports, a lot of combats can get quite protracted. It's not a simple case of charging, because no one really breaks. You take your battle shock tests, and when you lose them, you don't really run away. You just lose more models. So you could easily end up getting bogged down. So I was thinking in terms of Vampiric Sword, because I've got a decent chance of getting a charge in on a flying mount, but ultimately, and it's not guaranteed, but ultimately, I think I'm going to have a lot of combats where I've not charged. So I sort of made that decision. Now, obviously, in the game itself, you'll have to modify that, because that was assuming that opponents have a save of 4+. They might have less save. I might go into a scrubbier unit that basically gets no save against my rend. Or I might get one that has ward save, or not ward save, what do they call it? Whatever they call it now, where you get a save that's different to an armor save, all of these sorts of things. But again, that's why it helps to be able to work them all out in advance, so you can think to yourself, what are my chances of success? How much damage am I likely to do? And it's not a guarantee. You could be unlucky, but you could be lucky. But more times out of them, you will get what you expect to get. So then I was doing another one. So with the Nighthaunt army, I was working out, I have a Knight of Shrouds that I want to be my general on an ethereal steed. And I was looking at the artifacts of power, and there were a couple that caught my eye. One of them was like a magic weapon, and what this one did, it just basically added +1 to hit and wound. So it already hits and wounds on 3s, it now make it 2s. It's very likely now to hit and wound. But another one, which also looked very tasty, was a different type of artifact, which if you do any wounds at all with your normal attacks, then this one will cause D3 mortal wounds on a unit within whatever, 3 inches, I can't remember exactly, but close by. So then with the Dreadbolt Ring, again, obviously effect 2.4 because it's normal, but then D3 mortal wounds, that's an average of 2, and against most units, mortal wounds are wounds, so that's probably, you can probably add another 2 to that. So you're talking about 3.7 against about 4.4. And so statistically, I'm thinking to myself, well, I'd probably be better off with the Dreadbolt Ring. So that's what I might well go for, unless I decide to take that on a different character or something like that. But and this is the sort of thing you can do in advance. But you also need to be able to work things out on the fly. Now, the last little scenario I'll give here, again from Fantasy Battle days, when I was playing my Skaven army. Now, the thing about a Skaven army is there's no cavalry really. So you've got infantry, but it needs to be very attacking. It can't be like a dwarf army where you can sit back and shoot. It does have some firepower if you choose to give it that, or it certainly did. Seems to have a little bit more now, but at the time it had a bit, but it wasn't brilliant. You certainly, against most armies, I'm not going to say all, but against most armies, you didn't want to sit back and shoot. So the strategy was never to sit back and shoot. Any other army that had a decent amount of shooting in it would likely outdo you eventually over time. So you needed to get up there. Now the problem with that is you're infantry, but you're also a chargey to the front infantry. So your flanks are very weak. They're very susceptible to... It could just be some light cavalry that doesn't intend to attack you, but it just gets close enough to stop you marching, which means you're much slower across the board. Maybe they've got something to shoot with and they pick a few of you off as well. Or maybe it's some cavalry that's going to do well and is just going to charge into your flank. This is a big worry. So what I took was something called rattling guns to protect my flanks. And I was playing this Dark Elf player. And I protected my right flank by moving, because he'd set up a lot of his stuff in a corner. I wouldn't have done that with his army. I would have set it more centrally, forcing me to go more centrally, then he can attack both flanks. But because he set a lot of his stuff up in a corner, it allowed me to protect my right flank with the edge of the board. You know, there wasn't room for him to get down there. So I was able to put... I mean, my rattling guns, because they were detachments for other units, had to be closest to those other units. But that was fine. I was able to do that. And I basically put those a little bit back, but effectively on the left flank. So I had 2 rattling guns there. And he started to move his cavalry down there. And I sort of felt at this point, because it was a relatively new unit, I felt I had to explain how it worked. So how they worked at the time is the number of hits they scored. There was no rolling for hits or anything like that. You rolled for how many hits, and they just hit. And the idea was you could roll a d6, and that would be how many hits. But then you could choose to roll another d6 and add it on and keep doing it. You could keep doing it as long as you liked. But if you, with any of your dice rolls, rolled a result that you'd already got, then it misfired. That was pretty bad. Now, technically, if you just rolled 1d6, it couldn't possibly misfire. As a Skaven player, I always felt that should be out. You should always be able to misfire with these things. So I always used to roll 2d6, regardless. Because sometimes you might think, if you roll 1d6 and get a 6, you might think, well, that'll do. I always used to roll 2. Then I would start to think, because you didn't have to decide in advance how many you're going to roll. You could do one at a time until you lost your nerve, basically. So I explained how it all worked, thinking to himself that he would sort of think twice about doing what he was going to do. But he didn't. He moved there anyway. Now, his Dark Riders would have been completely obliterated, and later on in the battle they were. But what he did is he moved his Cold One Knights. So these were his heavy cavalry, with the intention of charging the flank of my Storm Vermin. So I had 2 rattling guns. Now, again, what you do is you look at the situation. You think to yourself, okay, heavy cavalry, 2+ armour save. Toughness 3 because they're elves. So these shots are going to do strength 4. Strength 4 against toughness 3 means 2/3 chance of wounding, because the hits is just based on how many hits I'm going to get. If I roll 2d6, that's an average of 7 hits. That's how it works out. So 2/3 chance of wounding. Against the armor, it was strength 4, armor piercing. That meant it took 2 off the armor save. So his 2+ armor save becomes a 4+ armor save. So basically, 1/3 of my hits on average will kill a Cold One Knight. He had 6 Cold One Knights in the unit, plus he had a hero character. But whatever the number in that unit was, as long as he had 5 at least in that unit, the hero wouldn't get any of those shots, after which it would be randomized. So I thought to myself, okay, so I've got 2 rattling guns here. If I roll 2d6, there's a 1 in 6 chance of it misfiring, so I'm okay with those odds. Excuse me. And that'd be average 7. Now, if I had 1 rattling gun, I'd be thinking to myself, okay, 7, that's probably about 2 dead Cold One Knights. 3 if I'm slightly lucky. If I get really lucky, maybe more. If I get unlucky, maybe fewer, maybe none. But ultimately, on average, I could probably expect, if I roll 2d6, to kill 2 Cold One Knights. That would still leave 4 Cold One Knights and a hero. That's still not going to be nice going into the flanks of my Storm Vermin, especially when there's another unit that I'm actually facing. You know, if I turn to face it, well, that unit's just going to charge my flank anyway. So I'm going to get mugged either way. I really need them gone. So then what I might have thought, if it was like 1 rattling gun, is I might have thought, well, let's roll 3d6. Or roll another one on top of it anyway, as long as it didn't misfire. But at that point, I now create a 1 in 3 chance of a misfire. Still unlikely, but it's getting closer to a bit, you know, squeaky bum time. That would result in about 11. You know, basically about 4 dead Cold One Knights. Now, 4 dead Cold One Knights in that unit might have been okay, because that would have left him with 2 Cold One Knights and his hero. It's still enough to take my set bonus away if I don't kill at least 1 in combat, and they do have a good armor save. But there's no way I would risk 4. However, in this particular case, I had 2 rattling guns. So the question became, you fire 1 rattling gun at a time. With the first rattling gun, if I roll 2d6, and let's say I got the average number killed, which would be about 2, do I risk the 3rd die and don't actually end up killing it? Because I have to roll the die. I have to roll how many hits. I can't just roll that many hits, then resolve the wounds, and then see if I want to roll another. I have to get all the hits first. Let's say I get about an average. Let's say I get 7 hits. Do I risk rolling another, knowing that that in itself is not going to break that unit? But with the second rattling gun, you know, all of a sudden on average with 2 rattling guns, I roll 2d6 with each. That's about 5 dead. That'll do. That will do. That will break the back of it. That will stop it becoming a... It still would be problematic going into my flank, but it wouldn't be as problematic. Especially as I think a detachment at the time got a stand and shoot as well. So one of those rattling guns would have also got to do a stand and shoot against it. And it's things like that, because you need to be able to work it out. Because if I roll more dice than I strictly needed, because there's no erring on the side of caution with this. If I roll more dice than needed, I risk it misfiring and I get no shots off. And so that is the importance of it. And when you see people who have such a poor understanding of the probability, they inevitably end up making actions where they can only succeed if they get very lucky. And I think that is why it is important. I think it's important to play back, because it's not complex probability either. It's the sort of simple probability everyone would have done at school. You just need to be able to apply it in this situation. And it helps, as I say, if you can work these things out on the fly, adjust and adapt to whatever you've got. And it's also where it helps, of course, if you understand what you're up against, because things like saving rolls are the things that always need the constant adjustment. That is always what's going to be a factor in there to give yourself the best chance of success. So anyway, that's just what I wanted to say on that one. As I say, I'm going to follow up hopefully very soon with a bit of an update with my Project Warhammer, which is where my Nighthaunt are going. It's all very delayed, sorry about that. But I hope you enjoyed this video anyway. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.